welcome to WIDA. We are so glad that you could join us for today's very interesting event. Before we turn to our panel, however, I'd like to put two events on your radar screen. In 2 weeks, we have a great event looking at another somewhat arcane but incredibly impactful topic, the use of executive authorities in U.S. trade policy. That's on Zoom on October 24th with Professors Kathleen Clausen of Georgetown and Tim Meyer from Duke. Then on October 31st, and this is not public yet, we have a real treat as we'll be hosting an in-person event with the ambassador from the EU and a fireside chat with former USTR Susan Schwab. That'll be followed by a panel discussion, and that event will also be streamed for those of you who cannot join us in Washington, D.C. You can find information on those events and our upcoming WIDA Academy events for college students on our website, www.wita.org. As you know, if you've joined us for one of our webinars in the past, we like to call out the names of some of those you are in community with on Zoom, even if you cannot see them on screen. So welcome today to Beth Hughes, the American Apparel and Footwear Association, Terry Bravo with DHL, Michael Anderson with BASF, Chris Denzel with Caterpillar, and Nick Pence with Under Armour. So welcome Beth, Terry, Michael, Chris, and Nick, and welcome to all of you. If you are watching this on Zoom, you can ask questions of our panel using the Q&A tab. You should have also received a copy of today's event program by email just a few minutes ago. That email contains a link, and you can see our panelists' biographies there. We have a terrific event today, and we're pleased to welcome our guests, a couple newcomers and a couple people who've been on with us before. Welcome to Felicia Pullam, Executive Director of the Office of Trade Relations at the Office of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency. Ralph Carter, Staff Vice President for Regulatory Affairs at FedEx and a member of WIDA's Board of Directors. Kim Glas, President and CEO of the National Council of Textile Organizations and a Commissioner on the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. Melissa Irmen, Director of Advocacy at the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones. And John Pickel, Senior Director of International Supply Chain Policy at the National Foreign Trade Council. And our moderator, Anna Swanson, Trade and Economics reporter at the New York Times and a 2024 winner of WIDA's Lighthouse Award in recognition of the importance of Anna's reporting on some of the most important trade and economic issues facing the United States and the world. Thank you, Anna, Ralph, Kim, Melissa, John, and Felicia for joining us. Anna?
Thank you so much, Ken. And thank you for inviting me to host this event. It's going to be another really fabulous WIDA event. I know you put on so many of these, and I'm really happy to be a part. So today we are going to be talking about the de minimis exemption for imports. This is one of those wonky trade topics that might repel non-trade people with some of the jargon, but it's really fascinating, current, and important, as I think you'll hear from our panelists here today. De minimis is the de minimis exemption for imports applies to goods that are valued at $800 or less. And these goods can enter the United States with less information than some other imports and without being subject to duties and taxes, crucially. De minimis is a Latin word meaning too trivial or minor to merit consideration, but in the last few years, de minimis shipping has become anything but trivial and minor. The volume of de minimis shipments has exploded over the last 10 years from around 140 million a year to now over 1 billion. And there are a few reasons for the rise in those shipments and in the interest in this topic. The first big theme, I think, is the rise of certain e-commerce platforms and businesses that are shipping directly from factories overseas, often in China, to consumers. And in the process, they're shaving lots of costs by bypassing some of the traditional warehousing and retail footprint of more traditional retail models. And this is a model that was particularly speeded by the pandemic. The second big reason, I think, is the application of tariffs by the United States on China on hundreds of billions of dollars of products from China, starting in the Trump administration. De minimis products have not been subject to those tariffs, so that has sparked a lot of the discussion. Supporters say this is an important system for keeping international trade flowing, and critics say this is providing a channel for low-cost products, mainly from China, that violate forced labor and consumer safety laws and undercut American manufacturers. So we have a really fabulous panel here today with a wide variety of viewpoints on this topic. So I'd like to first just invite you all to weigh in just for a couple minutes on what de minimis is, why it matters, and what sets your view on de minimis apart, maybe from the other panelists here today. So Felicia, let's start with you. Can you tell us about what de minimis is and how, this is affecting the Customs and Border Protection, how CBP deals with these packages?
Thank you very much. And it was a great summary. So appreciate the introduction you provided. And I also just want to add, I noticed in the introductions, there were the words like arcane and wonky, and it's true. I mean, I think Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, we do appreciate the chance to really talk about this issue. And if this is whetting your appetite for our audience and you're interested in learning more, we're happy to continue that conversation afterwards. So, as stated, an importer can claim the de minimis exemption if their shipment or shipments do not exceed $800 in a single day. And that means they don't pay duties, taxes, or fees. So the number of these shipments has really skyrocketed over the past several years. Back in fiscal year 2015, there were around 140 million per year. So that's 140 million versus fiscal year 23, when there was, we hit 1 billion for the first time. So that's an increase of about 660%. And we, for us, it was a very big deal when we hit 1 billion. But in fiscal year 24, we surpassed 1 billion by the end of Q3. So that means we were a full quarter ahead of where we were last year. That's about 2.8 million shipments per day in fiscal year 23 and close to 4 million per day in fiscal year 24. So that is a big jump and shows you how fast this is growing. As of July 30th, 2024, 89% of all of our seizures in the cargo environment originated as de minimis shipments. So that's granted, that's number of shipments. It's not volume and it's not value, but it's the number of shipments. And number matters to us. That's a lot of staff time, a lot of workload put towards that number. And it also matters to the individual people who would otherwise be receiving these violative shipments. So that's 97% of our cargo narcotics seizures, which largely includes things like pill presses and dye sets, precursor chemicals, other types of drugs. 92% of our intellectual property rights seizures, so that's trademark violations, counterfeits, things that impact American businesses, and 72% of our health and safety seizures. And again, these are things that directly impact the health and safety of consumers. And so that's within the cargo environment. At the same time, amid this explosive growth, our staffing has not grown at the same pace. So we still have roughly the same number of officers processing cargo as we did in 2016, when the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act increased the de minimis limit from $200 to $800. So we are investing in technology. We are doing a lot of things to explore, how we can use our authorities to better enforce, but we do need more resources to work on this. I don't want to be the kind of person that takes up all the time in my intro, because I know we have a lot of speakers. I think later I can get into some examples, especially of the consumer health and safety impacts. But I will leave you with one this is not consumer health and safety, but it's perhaps my most shocking example, where last year, my colleagues in Florida found an entire stolen helicopter that had been disassembled and shipped in smallish packages, claiming the de minimis exemption. So there's some real hazards in there. And I would kind of summarize our challenges in the de minimis environment in three ways. First, limited, often unreliable information that's submitted along with those imports, outdated authorities, that hinder our enforcement against these modern day threats. So some of these authorities haven't been updated since 1993, and that predates e-commerce marketplaces. Some of the most famous ones were only founded later, a few years later. So high volumes of de minimis shipments in all modes are also straining our existing resources. So that's limited information, outdated authorities, and high volumes versus our existing resources. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you for the next speaker.
Great. Thank you for that overview. So Ralph, let's go to you next. You work for FedEx, regulatory affairs at FedEx. Can you talk a bit about how de minimis has impacted your business and other express shippers?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Thanks to Wita. Glad to be able to talk about de minimis. I think there are reasonable conversations we can have about some of the trade issues we're going to talk about and some of the issues that Felicia mentioned. But, the torches and pitchforks that are coming after de minimis recently are a bit misguided in our view. In our view, we don't think de minimis is the right cure. We don't think it's going to really address some of the issues that Felicia just mentioned. And what I want to do today quickly with my time is to address some of the misconceptions that kind of surround the debate about de minimis. First is this idea that de minimis doesn't get any scrutiny from CBP. It does. FedEx provides about 30 data elements for every shipment that we clear off our manifest. And CBP maintains customs officers in our facilities so that they can inspect any shipment they want to anytime. And Felicia mentioned, 89% of seizures. Well, in fact, 89% of all entries into the United States are de minimis. That's the number, and it's what's reflected in our numbers as well. So, but what she's saying is one shirt counts the same as one 20-foot container filled with 1,000 shirts. That's the comparison she's making. So it's kind of a misleading figure to look at number of seizures. You should be looking at volume. And of course, when you look at drugs, the volume of drugs interdicted, almost 100% are coming across the southern border. So I think it's important to again, level set on some of those numbers. What we think we need to do is use the data that we already have in much more effective ways. The way to do that is to greatly increase information sharing between the private sector and law enforcement agencies. I also wanted to address the increase that we've seen in de minimis. It was not Congress's decision to increase from 200 to 800 that's caused this, because the average value of de minimis is still just about $50. The real reason that we've seen this huge increase is the CBP's Type 86 pilot project, which opened up automated de minimis clearance for all kinds of importers, many of which don't have the same level of control and collaboration that we do with customs. I also want to mention the postal system. If we only squeeze de minimis and the private sector, it's only going to push the illicit trade into the postal channel. So if we're really serious about addressing some of these challenges, we really need to step up our enforcement under the STOP Act, because right now it is really not being enforced. I also want to talk about the economic benefits of de minimis. I don't think we've covered that enough in this discussion because they're significant. Increased customs clearance efficiency, affordable goods for consumers, and lots of commercial opportunities for businesses of all sizes. On the other hand, if we crack down too hard on de minimis, it will result in really a regressive tax increase, because it's going to hurt the low-income Americans the hardest. And it's also going to raise the cost of living for all Americans at a time when we really can't afford that. So, Felicia mentioned the CBP resources, and they are stretched. And we have always supported increased funding for customs. Rather than trying to reduce trade, let's give CBP the tools and the resources they need to do their job effectively. But if we convert these millions of shipments from de minimis into formal, informal clearances, we're going to have serious supply chain backups because there simply isn't the resources to manage that. And so that's going to affect all importers, not just importers of de minimis. Before I end, I just want to say that, of course, there's no place in the FedEx network for trafficking of illicit goods. We think the best way to prevent that is for greater cooperation and information sharing between law enforcement and the private sector. We need to focus on the bad actors that we know about rather than the 99% of legitimate traders that are using and benefiting from de minimis. Taking a hatchet to de minimis really only advances a protectionist trade agenda much more than it addresses the issues it is, seeking to solve. So we think that we have more effective tools that we can use to catch bad actors that don't necessarily impose large costs on U.S. consumers, businesses, and supply chains. So that's our view, and I look forward to our discussion.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can already tell this is going to be a very active debate, an interesting debate. So thank you for those remarks. And Felicia, I'll come back to you a little bit later to give you a chance to respond to some of that and address an additional question to you. But first, I want to bring in our other panelists. Let's see. Kim, I'd love to go to you next. You represent a group that works with textile manufacturers. And I'd love to know more about how de minimis, in your view, is impacting domestic manufacturing.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you all today. This is a key question. We have, as a U.S. textile industry, I have in the background here, we make PPE, we make for our U.S. military, and we also make for the commercial marketplace. Over the last 18 months, we have lost 18 plants. 18 plants that have survived the Great Recession, the Great Depression, and COVID are not surviving the influx of these small packages coming in, receiving duty-free treatment, little scrutiny, and facilitating forced labor product. This is not just a wildfire for the U.S. textile industry. While it's estimated that half of de minimis packages coming in, of the 1.4 billion projected this year, half of them are expected to be textile and apparel goods. This is a gut punch to an industry that is critical to the U.S. economy and critical to our supply chains. It's not just us that are impacted. Many of our retail customers who are playing by the rules are also impacted. The U.S. Congress didn't vote for a free trade agreement with China and the rest of the world, but yet this is undermining all of our free trade agreements and trade preference programs. If people want duty-free textile and apparel goods, we would welcome that. We work a lot with our regional trade partners, and we have over 20 free trade agreements. And we have trade preference programs that benefit 50 countries, duty-free trade. But I also want to address some other things that are even more important. It is one thing to lose a U.S. textile company in some of these rural communities. It's another thing to lose a family member because fentanyl and precursors are coming in the de minimis environment. And I know we have fentanyl advocacy groups on this call today. This is very personal to them. The consumer risks are great in the de minimis environment. We have had a multitude of reports. What kind of, would you want to hand your child a pacifier that came in through the de minimis environment virtually unchecked? So a few thoughts to respond to some of Ralph's comments on this issue, because this is very personal to the U.S. textile industry. We look at consumer pricing because this is our business. And since 2011, on unit pricing coming out of China, we've seen a 50% unit price drop on textile and apparel products, rock bottom prices. We are a deflationary industry that has historically been deflationary. This is not going to impact consumer prices whatsoever in this environment. There's been analysis done by the ITC that shows even the 301 tariffs had nominal impacts and certainly not significant impacts for our U.S. textile industry. But this is a wildfire out of control, benefiting a few at the expense of many. We've seen the rise of these e-commerce websites that are selling these kinds of products, not playing by the rules, and our trade system is rewarding this. I lament the day. Every day I worry I'm going to get a call, a U.S. textile company is going down, or one of our regional allies, or one of our customers in the retail supply chain. And out of part of the Close the De Minimis Loophole Coalition, we are fighting to try to close this loophole. We're glad the administration took some initial action here and also called on the U.S. Congress to do comprehensive reform. It's urgent. We need an urgent solution, and we appreciate this opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Kim. John, let's go to you next. You're with the National Foreign Trade Council. Your membership includes a lot of importers and exporters. How is de minimis affecting your membership?
Sure. So de minimis is an exemption from import taxes, as you said earlier. It benefits the U.S. economy to the tune of $1.4 billion and particularly benefits low-income consumers in low-income zip codes. It allows U.S. exporters to offer free returns so that they can be more competitive in the international marketplace. And based on the numbers that Felicia gave earlier, are largely compliant in the context of the broader import landscape. So, for example, when we talk about the percentage of narcotic seizures and counterfeits and health safety, particularly when we talk about health and safety seizures and detentions, if de minimis is 89%, that is actually very compliant compared to some of the other environments where goods come into the country. I'll also compare that a little bit to the fentanyl numbers as well that have been referenced a few times. So clearly, based on those detention and seizure statistics, CBP is looking at de minimis for all manner of violations, right? Based on the information they're getting, which is largely similar to information they get in higher volume areas as well. I think the notable exception is the 10-digit harmonized tariff schedule classification. So, if we compare the numbers of the seizures in some of these functional areas with the fentanyl seizures, we are seeing that 95% plus are coming across the southwest border and not through de minimis areas. I disagree with the characterization as de minimis as a free trade agreement with China. Every country that imports into the United States has access to de minimis, provided that they're acting in a compliant way. And as others have noted, de minimis products are still subject to entry requirements, aside from paying duties, taxes, and fees. So we are really looking at here is a reduction in red tape, a lowering of transaction costs, and a product class that, while there are instances of non-compliance that should be addressed through improved information flows. I think we can all agree with that we want to have compliance. We want to have CBP getting the information that allows them to effectively and efficiently target their enforcement resources. I think that can be done in a way that doesn't impact the economic benefits of de minimis. De minimis is also helping with supply chains in terms of facilitating them, where we see some proposals that would actually degrade the efficiency of supply chains and degrade the ability of CBP to effectively enforce. For example, if CBP were applying certain types of tariffs to low value goods and spending significant amounts of money to collect $13 in certain types of duty, and doing that 600 million times over again, there would obviously be a very significant impact on their capacity to process cargo coming through ports of entry every year. I think also on the competitiveness front, I've heard from some specific companies who have said, that they were in investment rounds, and they employ U.S. workers, they own U.S. intellectual property, and they were soliciting investment, and those investment opportunities have dried up based on concerns about what the future outlook is for de minimis, and I think that's very unfortunate. But I would also just point out what the same individual told me is that when we talk about policies that effectively increase tariff rates, it's very clear to see who would benefit from those actions. But you really need to peel back the layers of the onion to identify everybody who loses. For example, CBP having to collect duty at a loss every day. $1.4 billion degradation to the U.S. economy, and then also all the supply chain efficiencies that would cost consumers and businesses as well, in addition to the export competitiveness angle that I mentioned earlier.
Great, thank you. And finally, let's go to Melissa. So, the role of foreign trade zones in this conversation is really interesting as well. It's kind of another element to it. Can you just explain, how are foreign trade zones involved in this debate?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I appreciate the invitation, Anna. And in the introduction, you mentioned, de minimis being sort of a wonky trade term. A lot of people refer to the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone similarly. Our program was created by Congress in 1934. It actually predates de minimis by 4 years. And so the creation of this tool for U.S. companies to take opportunities where tariffs have inadvertently disadvantaged U.S. companies has been something that U.S. manufacturing and distributors have been using for almost a century now. But unfortunately, when it comes to de minimis, our U.S. foreign trade zones are not able to do de minimis entry. So we have foreign competitors that can bring goods here duty-free, while our own U.S. manufacturers and distributors cannot do likewise. So from our perspective, we're looking at de minimis in terms of jobs. This has been raised by other folks, that we're seeing our members being actively solicited to move their products and move their warehouses offshore instead of housing them here in the US, where we can maintain a sense of quality and also supervision by customs, and instead have them outside so that they can take the opportunity to use de minimis. Our perspective is that we should be giving our U.S. companies the same privilege as these non-U.S. companies are receiving. U.S. foreign trade zones are bonded operations. They're managed by Customs and Border Protection. We're actually a perfect partner to address a lot of the challenges that some of my fellow panelists have been talking about around security and opportunities to stop illicit product. All of the products that move into a foreign trade zone are actually reported in full detail to U.S. Customs the moment that they hit our warehouses and our operations. And so from that perspective, we give that extra level of security and an opportunity to help partner with CBP to address some of the resource concerns that have been raised earlier. So the fact that we can't use these as trusted partners of Customs is something that we hope will be addressed if whatever change happens to de minimis, if any.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask a few questions myself, but I'd also like to invite the audience. If you'd like to put questions in the chat, I'll do my best to get to some of those as well. So Felicia, let's go back to you. There have been numerous bills in Congress considered on this issue, and last month the Biden administration proposed its own change to the rules, where goods that are subject to various trade actions under Section 301, Section 201, other trade laws will no longer receive that exemption. I was wondering if you could explain the significance of the administration's recent action. What was this move? What is the timeline for it to go into effect? And what impact you expect it to have? Thanks.
Great, thank you. Happy to do that. And I know there's so much interesting things that are coming up in this. I know that some of the points that were raised by some of our other speakers, we do have also comments to share, but I'll still hold off on this because I think it's important to kind of share the administration's proposals. So the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, has worked very closely with the administration on this, and we took into consideration resources and what we're capable of enforcing. That's something that is very important to us, is making sure that whatever's proposed is enforceable. And I think we said earlier that right now the volume is too high for us. So the aim of these proposals are to protect American consumers, level the playing field for American workers and manufacturers, and then improve CBP's ability to enforce all of our trade laws in the de minimis environment. So there were 3 key regulatory actions. The first is that we're working on a notice of proposed rulemaking, or NPRM, to require specific additional data elements for de minimis shipments to improve our ability to target and to sort of clarify the rules as this is coming in, taking the lessons learned that we've had from the 2 pilots that we're running and incorporating that into an NPRM. And because it's an NPRM, there will be time for public comment when this is published. So this would provide us with some of the key tools that we urgently need. But as I'll mention later, there are things that can only really be done by statute. So the second regulatory action, I think, is kind of the big one. And this would be a notice of proposed rulemaking to exclude products that are covered by Section 301, Section 201, or Section 232 tariffs. These are trade remedies, and these trade remedies exist for a reason. And I think we've been hearing from many retailers that are bringing in goods in the sort of more traditional way that they would like to compete in a fair environment. So the third regulatory action is something that our colleagues at the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or the CPSC, have been working on. They've been leading this, and it's a final rule that would require importers of consumer products to file certificates of compliance electronically with CBP and CPSC at the time of entry, including in de minimis shipments. So obviously now you have automation, you have technology that can really facilitate and enable us to get these kinds of certificates electronically, which would also apply to duties. All of that is done electronically now. So as I mentioned, further action is needed in Congress to reform de minimis, and the administration stands ready to work with Congress, and CBP is always eager to provide technical assistance. And I will say that we deeply appreciate and are heartened by the interest that we've seen in Congress on this, and all of the attention that they've paid so far. And so this is something that we think is very promising. So specifically, the administration proposes de minimis reforms that would first exclude import-sensitive products. So this would be excluding products basically based on category rather than country of origin. So something that is intrinsic in the good, like this good is this, and that's excluded, as opposed to trying to determine the country of origin. But we are also proposing that Congress take action to exclude goods that are subject to trade remedies. I know I already mentioned that we were going to do this by regulation, but it is faster if that's done by Congress. And then finally, we hope that the administration's detect and defeat counterfentanyl proposal can be integrated into any congressional action. So whatever kind of big picture reform that Congress decides to pursue, we believe that the detect and defeat counterfentanyl proposals are complementary to that. They would dramatically improve the tools that we have to manage e-commerce shipments. And so more specifically, that includes first collecting more reliable advanced data on de minimis shipments to improve our ability to manage risk and identify the illicit shipments. So we need to be able to collect data from what we call non-traditional parties. So what is a non-traditional party? A party that was not involved in this kind of transaction, or maybe even didn't exist in 1993 when these statutes were last updated. So e-commerce marketplaces did not exist in 1993. So a second piece would be to share information about potentially high-risk supply chain parties with the trade industry. So this is something that I think Ralph actually referenced. Like, we would like to be we're limited in what kind of information we can share, but we want to empower partners like FedEx and other companies that are involved in this to stop these goods from getting to the border in the first place. And then for those who are not serious about it, we also want to be able to hold them accountable for not taking action. A third piece of this is to leverage more efficient mechanisms for seizing and disposing of violative shipments. This is kind of a piece that often gets overlooked because it sounds sort of not important. It's really, this is about cutting the bureaucracy and freeing up resources that we could otherwise use for targeting and interdicting these goods. So when we need to sort of administratively forfeit, or a shipment is abandoned in the de minimis environment, that takes up a lot of staff time. So when we're talking about numbers versus volumes, it takes the same amount of staff time to process like a single, like a $10 bag of socks as it would like a large shipment. And so we need to be able to shorten these times and cut that bureaucracy. It can be from $1,100 to $2,300 per shipment to process that. So it's sort of the reverse of what de minimis was intended to in the first place. All right, so we also have proposed a fee on de minimis shipments, and this is something that's very important to us, to create sustainable funding to manage the high volume threat in this environment. And then we need to also have the ability to issue stronger penalties to more effectively deter trafficking. So some of these penalties are limited to the value of the goods. So literally in a de minimis environment, that means that the penalties are also de minimis. So I think taken together with the regulatory actions and the other things that we're doing on enforcement, as well as these legislative proposals, we believe that this could help overall reduce the volume of shipments, prevent illegal, unsafe, and unfairly traded goods from entering the U.S. market, and protect American consumers, workers, and businesses.
Great, thank you. That's a wonderful overview and a lot of really interesting information there. I wanted to ask some of the rest of you to kind of look into your crystal ball with what might happen with some of these regulations. What do you think the impact of these new rules will be? What might happen to trade patterns as a result of them? Who might be the winners and losers? And then if you have any thoughts about, what kind of future regulation might be needed. So maybe Kim, we can start with you, and then just please feel free to, jump in and discuss.
Yeah, thank you. Since the de minimis environment is impossible to police and requires a lot less information than normal entry of products, and there's an avalanche of boxes, making it very difficult, if not impossible, for CBP officers who are working really hard on the ground to police all of this. And given the threat to businesses, but consumers and society as a whole, several countries are taking very aggressive action to getting rid of de minimis altogether. The EU is proposing to eliminate de minimis entirely. Brazil is closing off de minimis. South Africa is closing off de minimis. So in this environment, I think most countries are recognizing the impacts, the ancillary impacts that are happening in their local communities. So this was intended in the 1930s to allow grandma to bring back a sweater from abroad and not have to pay a tariff. It was never intended to hypercharge this avalanche of boxes. So we agree that the volume of boxes needs to go down dramatically. If I had a magic wand, I'd get rid of de minimis for all e-commerce tomorrow, but my magic wand doesn't always work. With that being said, we appreciate the administration's action. We also appreciate the administration asking for more comprehensive action, including excluding product sectors. Now, here's the deal. On the rulemaking process, it's a long process ahead, and I think the administration is working very hard to get that rulemaking process underway before President Biden leaves office. We also have a lame duck session this year, and so the presidential election is only a few weeks away. It is critical for Congress to come together. This is a bipartisan issue. Everybody's talking about this issue on both sides of the aisle. And I think consensus could be forged to actually helping bring down the volume of boxes, have these items come in through the normal ports of entry in terms of cargo ships and things like taking a t-shirt and testing it, or taking a baby product and testing it, and helping fight the fentanyl crisis that so many families are facing.
Okay, great. Would anyone else like to jump in on this issue of regulation and what the impact might be? John, go ahead, please.
I disagree with the idea that this is an impossible area to police, right? CBP has put great effort into understanding the patterns of trade flows within the de minimis space. And we heard earlier what those percentages are. We heard about the importance of information. And if you look at a side-by-side comparison of what information is received on a shipping manifest, that's submitted to CBP on a de minimis shipment compared to a higher value shipment. We are talking about very similar information with the absence of I think 2 data points that are used mostly to calculate duty, right? So I think that's an important point of context here. So going through this regulatory process, we're coming out of the other end with 2 additional pieces of data that may or may not be directly related to enforcement. And I know CBP is working on regulations that'll clarify that, and they've been working on tests and pilots that for the last 5 or 6 years that have been looking into the applicability of the HTS code for enforcement purposes. I do just want to keep in mind that we are talking about largely similar information here. And also the importance of what some of these proposals will mean in terms of shifting trends, as you asked, Anna. We see a very significant shift to the international post environment. Ralph mentioned that a little bit earlier. It wasn't all that long ago when we were talking about international mail as being the primary entry pathway for narcotics. And to this day, international post continues to be a challenging enforcement environment for CBP based on OIG reports and some assessment from CBP officials. So I don't want to go too far into that. I'll let CBP speak for themselves on that. But I think we have to be very careful about what pushing volume into the international mail stream would look like, because that is an area that the U.S. government does not control what data elements are provided to border enforcement officers to perform their targeting. So I think we just need to be careful about pushing volume into that back into that stream.
Felicia, do you just want to very quickly respond to that? I'm curious what you think about the amount of data you get from de minimis versus non-de minimis shipments. There have been some comments about, CBP resources. Just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly appreciate when industry highlights the fact that we need more resources. I think that is something that's indisputably true. And I think that the fee that we've proposed could really contribute to that. So I think that there are a lot of different kind of areas that have come up here. One is in the sort of postal environment, and we have and I think it also matters where these shipments are coming from. That's true. So we do have the postal environment, and we have international mail facilities that we have been investing in. We are able to screen packages that are coming through those, and we do work with the post office on that. There are requirements through the Universal Postal or United Postal Union. That's an international treaty requirements. And so there are some things that we cannot do in that environment that we could do in other environments. But we shouldn't let the sort of perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to address the problems that we have in other environments, and CBP and our partners at the U.S. Postal Service are committed to staying vigilant and identifying as flows change, like what additional reforms might be needed. So we do have shipments that have come through Express, but we also have shipments that are coming through in other ways. So, I mean, I think when most people think about this kind of shipment, you sort of naturally think of Express and you think of mail, but there's also these goods that are coming in through air cargo. So non-express air cargo, we're seeing a massive amount of shipments coming in that way. We're also seeing shipments that are growing that are coming in via truck. So these are coming into ports of entry that we haven't traditionally seen this stuff coming in that way. So truck, that implies, I think this refers to what Melissa was saying earlier, where you're having distribution in Mexico and Canada, and then, they're bringing in bulk maybe to those countries, keeping in warehouses, and then taking advantage of de minimis to kind of bring that into the US. So there's a lot of different ways. And I think no matter what changes we make, businesses will continue to adapt, bad actors will continue to adapt. So we have to stay as vigilant as we can. And I think both our commissioner and our secretary made statements saying that these proposed reforms are the first reforms, and that we have to keep on this issue and keep watching it as we move forward. So,
And there are a few questions actually about fentanyl, so maybe I'll ask you about this quickly. So, one Marilee of my fellow reporter points out that Reuters ran some stories this summer where its reporters imported fentanyl precursors and pill presses from China. In one case, CBP opened a package and sent it on. In another case, a package was sent on by FedEx. What does that tell us about what needs to change in the regulatory statute or staffing at CBP? And there was another question about, someone saying, they're also very concerned about the fentanyl issue. How does CBP intend to inspect millions of individual de minimis packages each day for illicit materials? And do you have any estimates of how much that would cost U.S. taxpayers? This does seem like it keeps cropping up as a theme, as an issue in this area. So, Felicia, I don't know if you want to take just a couple minutes to talk about that.
yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the specific instances that were referenced, but this fentanyl issue is something that's really important to us. And I think, we've been trying to kind of bang the drum a little bit about this to raise awareness of how important it is. I mean, this is a challenge. This really gets to the heart at why we believe that de minimis needs to be reformed. The volume is large, almost 4 million packages a day. That is a big challenge for us. We are investing in screening technologies where that is something that, obviously we need resources to do that. And we do need additional personnel as well as the reforms. So I mentioned a couple times the fee. Again, that is something where, we have a fee in certain types of environments already. So for example, the express industry, they already pay a fee on the shipments that they're bringing in. But then when you look at air cargo, when you look at stuff coming in via trucks, they don't pay a fee. So we have to use a lot of resources, U.S. government resources to try to do that. And I think it would, really help level the playing field if they had a fee to support that as well. So fentanyl, very serious issue. This is one of the most important things that we at CBP are focused on. But I also want to raise some additional things that affect it, also affect everyone. And that's the health and safety issues. So counterfeit airbags, those are things that could malfunction during a crash. Counterfeit lithium ion batteries could explode. Counterfeit helmets may not protect people during a fall. Misbranded, unapproved, or counterfeit contact lenses could steal someone's eyesight. Counterfeit prescription drugs may not contain the active ingredient promised, or it could lead to accidental overdoses. Faulty crib bumpers or children's sleepwear that don't meet U.S. standards. Counterfeit or shoddy clothing may contain chemicals that are unhealthy. Toys with lead paint and small parts that pose choking hazards. Mattresses that don't meet safety standards and could be evading anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Dangerous counterfeit or non-FDA approved e-cigarettes. Biological materials that can cause illnesses or threaten our agricultural industry. And then other things like Glas switches that can turn a semi-automatic handgun into a fully automatic weapon, firing 30 rounds in 2 seconds. So these are all real things that we found. And so all of these issues are really on our mind when we're doing enforcement.
Okay. Melissa, do you want to jump in really quickly? And I'm cognizant that our clock is ticking down. I wanted to ask another question, so maybe just a minute or two. Thanks.
Sure. I just wanted to piggyback on Felicia's comments around the consumer safety in particular, because I think from a U.S. foreign trade zone perspective, again, this is one of the reasons that we feel strongly that U.S. warehouses should have access to the capabilities of de minimis, because we have the procedures in place to prevent some of those things that Felicia is talking about. And it's just a small legislative wording difference between 1934 and 1938 that prevents us from being able to do it. And you asked earlier about, from a legislative perspective, what do we see? If we don't take care of our U.S. warehouses, we're going to see more of them moving offshore, like Felicia mentioned.
So there is an interesting question here from Stephanie Lester of Gap that maybe gets into some of those commercial dynamics. So she says, De minimis incentivizes U.S. companies to move distribution services offshore, threatening tens of thousands of good-paying U.S. distribution service jobs and reducing CBP's oversight and ability to protect American consumers. What policies do you recommend to help keep distribution service jobs in the United States and make American retailers competitive versus foreign retailers in the U.S. market? So maybe we can hear from some other panelists if you want to jump in.
Hi, I'm just going to jump in real quickly on this. No one is really talking about expanding de minimis. Everyone seems to be talking about limiting it in some way, shape, or form, whether it's on trade remedies, product-specific countries like China, et cetera, et cetera. We have a wildfire out of control. So allowing all of our foreign trade zones here in the United States to essentially be de minimis shipment hubs where you get product shipped in from China, put it into separate boxes, people click buttons at home coming to their doorstep, it will hypercharge a wildfire already out of control with more duty-free trade flowing in, more boxes than ever. So we as a manufacturing industry are opposed to any sort of expansion of de minimis. We understand, Melissa, what you're saying about warehousing jobs. We think the best way to level the playing field is getting rid of de minimis altogether, curtailing the boxes, not rewarding this trade, closing this loophole, and we'd love to work with you on that.
Just real quick, I can appreciate that. In terms of parity, however, if we don't give U.S. foreign trade zones the same parity as the other operations, it's not increasing the volume of de minimis, it's just putting it in a safer place so that rather than coming from a foreign warehouse where CBP has a harder time stopping it, it's putting it into a CBP-controlled bonded operation where they have better access to supervise these shipments.
John and then Ralph, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So just very quickly, I guess where I was where I would come from on sort of the proposal side of things in response to Stephanie's question is I don't understand how CBP spending officer resources when they have a 4,800 CBP officer deficit at this point and very much need more resourcing to collect 301 duties in particular, which would be about $13 on the average de minimis shipment. CBP would spend way more money in terms of officer resources to collect that money, and that's a revenue issue, right? That is going to or has the potential to take away from the ability to do some of the inspections that we were talking about on the consumer safety side, on the counterfeit side, et cetera. So I think those issues need to be put into their respective kind of boxes, if you will, from a revenue and an enforcement perspective. But I'll defer to Ralph. I know we're running out of time.
Thanks, John. Just a couple of points to pick up on some of the things that were mentioned. When Congress increased the de minimis level from 200 to 800 in TIFTIA, it specifically said that the reason we're doing this is to help businesses and consumers reduce costs and to import more efficiently. So clearly, they did intend for this to be a commercial mechanism. I also want to point out that de minimis as a percentage of the value of U.S. imports is in the low single digits. In other words, 4 or 5%. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, put some perspective around this. It's still a very small percentage of overall U.S. imports. And to Felicia's comment on the fee, absolutely, we pay $1.31 for every one of these that we clear. And again, that helps to support CBP's presence in our facility so that they have immediate access to all the packages that we transfer and all the data that we have available to them. And we support, additional charges on others who are not paying that so that we can, again, give CBP the resources they need to do their jobs effectively rather than trying to restrict trade. And we're actually very optimistic about the future of enhanced collaboration between the private sector and CBP. We're doing it now. We're working on it. CBP wants to do it. We want to do it. So we're very optimistic that we're going to make a lot of advances on that. And finally, I guess on how the impacts will be. I mean, it was said earlier, I think that 301s haven't had an impact on trade volumes in terms of textiles and many other things. But what it has done is just increase prices. And so we suspect that that's what will happen now. The big players will adjust. Maybe they'll pay their duties and the broker's fees and all of that. But the volumes will still come in. Americans will just be paying more for that same volume. And we will not have really fixed any of the issues that have been talked about today.
And Felicia, did you unmute because you wanted to respond to that, or are you just?
Yeah. And so, thinking through, some of the things that John said, when we're talking about collecting duties, I think that, it's important to keep in mind that the Section 301 duties aren't just about kind of the revenue collection. The trade remedies are put in place for a reason. And I think it's important for there to be fairness across how they're collected. So I think that regardless of the revenue, these things have other purposes. But when we talk about like how much resources CBP spends on collecting that revenue, most of this is automated now, right? And so we collect duties in an automated way electronically. So the incremental cost of collecting these additional duties or higher volumes of duties, that's negligible to us, right? So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think that it's also important to look at, we are getting a certain degree of information already on some of these shipments. And so the actors that are legitimate actors, it wouldn't necessarily cost that much more for them to adjust their systems and respond. And so, of course, we also have to think about like, what is the potential impact on small businesses? How would small businesses adjust? Well, a lot of small businesses that are importing use third-party software. There's logistics providers, there's customs brokers, there's payment services. There are a lot of companies that are involved in those types of transactions that could potentially facilitate compliance and enable people to figure out how to pay. Many of these marketplaces are extremely sophisticated, so we do anticipate that they should be able to adjust. I think there's been some research done, some economic numbers put out there. It's 10:58, so I don't think we have time to dig into those. We're happy to do that with people that have additional questions, because looking at the Q&A in here, there's some really, really good questions. And so I would just like to kind of leave with, when we're talking about numbers, these individual packages, they impact real people's lives. So when we're talking about volumes of fentanyl, 2 milligrams of fentanyl is enough to kill a single person. So a kilogram, which is a pretty common amount of fentanyl in the trafficking environment, that could kill, I think, 500,000 people. These are very potent, and each individual who's impacted, whether it's from fentanyl or whether it's from some other counterfeit good that they're getting, that's an American that we want to protect. So I'll just leave that there, and looking forward to further engagement on this very important issue.
Great. And we're almost out of time. I thought maybe we could just do a lightning round, just 1, 2, absolute max 3 sentences from the other people. If you want to give any concluding thoughts or something you didn't have a chance to mention. Thank you. We can just go down the line here. Maybe John, do you want to start?
Sure. I just, something that maybe hasn't come across quite as much as I thought it should have from me. We definitely believe that the current status quo as it relates to integrity of information that's being submitted to CBP needs to improve. That CBP needs more resourcing. I've said that a few times. But what I do want to come across is, nothing is perfect. We definitely want to continue this conversation as Felicia offered, and really want to have a holistic look at what some of the current proposals, what those consequences would be.
Anyone else?
I just want to note that the costs associated with de minimis cannot even be calculated. the cost of human life, consumer protection, the cost to U.S. manufacturers, and the fact that textile and apparel goods have seen a 50% unit price decline since 2011 from China. This is an urgent crisis. This is why other countries are taking immediate action. They're not taking partial action. There's not enough information that can be provided to CBP. Nobody labels their box precursors or fentanyl. We need to actually bring down the volume of boxes, help CBP get the resources they need, but have systematic, comprehensive reform on de minimis now.
Melissa?
I'd just like to add, NAFTZ agrees that de minimis we have some challenges and it needs to be reformed. We just want to make sure that the U.S. operations have parity with whatever is sorted out in the end.
Great. Ralph, did you want to add anything?
Just to say that, yeah, we look forward to the NPRMs coming out and looking at the ideas that CBP has to address some of these issues. You know, our focus is let's focus on the problem and the best way to address that, rather than kind of a broad brush mechanism that may not be as effective, but could create a lot of externalities in terms of higher prices and delays in the supply chain. So we look forward to the NPRMs and providing our comments and seeing if we can craft some reforms that are really effective in what we want to accomplish, but don't impose unreasonable costs across the economy.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists for a really interesting discussion. I know there's a lot more that we could talk about, a lot more audience questions, but we're at time today, so I'll hand it back to Ken.
Thank you. Really appreciate your all willingness to dive into this. I know we said arcane topic, and it is complicated. There's a lot of facets to this, things that even in the planning of this, I was unaware of. As a trade organization, we're not as focused on some of the issues that even were raised in the questions. So really appreciate everybody being part of this. We had over 25 questions asked, and Anna did a great job in trying to weave some of those in. We will share those with all our discussants. So some of those were very specific and directed, I think, at certain individuals on the panel. We will share all those questions and who asked them with our panelists, so they will be able to see those questions, and some of those were done in the form of comments as well. So we will share those with our speakers. Thank you very much, Kim, Ralph, John, Felicia, Melissa, and of course, Anna. Really appreciate all of you joining us today for this very important discussion. And we hope to have all of you who are in the audience back for our future discussions here.